Hey there, this is Dr. Jason Shumard, and I'm so happy for you to join us today on our part 4 of our Toxins video series here. So if you haven't already gone back and watched part 1, part 2, and part 3, I mean, you can watch today, get some great information, great value, but I would urge you to go back and watch those videos as well, because you're going to get some great background. So because on today's video, we're going to focus on the last part of these toxins, which is what we specifically do to handle these types of toxins. And I'm going to talk about the traditional avenue, and then what the more natural, if you will, or more of a holistic way of handling these toxins that has less symptoms, less side effects to it as well. So just a brief overview of what we've gone over, and this is going to be brief because I think it's important that we understand where we've been and where we are now, so we can have that background there. So again, the 3 most common types of toxins that we address in the practice here. And just to remind you, the types of conditions that I work with mainly are type 2 diabetes, thyroid conditions, autoimmune disease, and cognitive decline. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that all 3 of these toxins will impact those areas and those functions of the body, creating the disease process or the symptoms you're currently experiencing. Again, go back and watch video 1 and video 2 on that. So again, the biotoxins, right? Bio meaning living, toxins, so it's a living living organism, gets into your body, starts expelling toxins, heavy metal toxicity, and environmental toxins. So just a real brief overview of everything again. Biotoxins, these are most commonly mold. It's about 70 to 80% of the homes throughout the nation have been shown to have some sort of mold exposure. MARCoNS, which is a multi-antibiotic resistant bacterial infection, hangs out in the sinuses. And then we have Lyme disease, as well as a very common as well. And so we also have heavy metal toxins. We have lead, cadmium, mercury, and arsenic, and we talked about the potential exposures and how those can happen. And then, of course, we have our environmental toxins as well: air pollution, food, and other chemicals that we can be exposed to from farming, from air quality, from the foods, with the pollutions are the toxins they spray on the foods as well. And then we talked about the 2 types of problems or reasons for exposures. One of them is genetics, right? There is a certain percentage of the population that have a genetic predisposition to these types of toxins, meaning if you have this genetic variant, that means if you get exposed to these types of toxins, it's very difficult, if not impossible, for your body to get rid of them, genetically speaking. Now, the other thing is, which is more common, is the poor ability for our bodies to detoxify. When we're being exposed to these types of toxins, exposed to poor quality food, our body starts to break down, and that also in turn starts to create a problem with our liver, create a problem with our gallbladder, our ability to get things out through our kidneys, through our feces, and inclusive of our skin as well. So we start to develop poor detoxification pathways, and so when we have that, we start to build up of these problems, these toxins, and the next thing you know, our immune system starts to get all rampant and out of control, attacking these toxins, creating massive amounts of inflammation. This starts to create a breakdown, because imagine you had a fire in your home. What's that going to do to your home? It's going to destroy the walls, destroy the electrical, destroy your appliances, your furniture. Everything gets destroyed in an inflammatory or fire situation. The same thing happens in your body. It may take decades for the symptoms to finally arise, but eventually it'll arise as these things start to build up inside the system. And then next thing you know, you start to create a symptom or a disease process. Now, typically in the traditional model, that when that happens, the treatment of choice, if you will, is how are we going to suppress the symptom? How are we going to help the person feel better? And how are we going to help them manage their condition? So there's a management situation, and there's another pathway or another option out there, which is referred to as functional medicine. What we do is how we help someone to find out what's causing the problem. So that's what we're going to really discuss today, of what's really causing the problem and how to address it. So last time, it's really sticky. Last time we spoke about this, I didn't write everything down, I'm going to write it today, that we spoke about the types of ways that we can analyze for these types of things. So when we talk about the toxins, let's write it in red. We have toxins, and how are we going to test for them? So with mold, we can do it through urine. It's called a mycotox test. So a mycotox test, because that's the type of toxin that is expelled when you're exposed to mold, a mycotox. When we're looking at Marcons, this is a nasal swab. So it's a nasal swab. If you've ever done like a COVID test or a flu analysis, they put that big Q-tip up there, both nostrils, and they can evaluate to see if you have the infection. This is no different as well. And it's basically, it's a positive or negative. There's no in between. There's no gradient on that. And then line test. There's the traditional test, which is the Western blot. The problem with this test is it has a lot of false negatives. It's not a very sensitive test. So we can use a different test, which is a blood test, that will actually analyze for Lyme and co-infections as well. It's very important we analyze for the co-infections also, besides looking for the Lyme bacteria as well. So then we can do a heavy metals. I'm just going to abbreviate this HM. This is a blood metals test. So we're looking at a blood test, but you can also do hair and urine. And that's going to be important specifically if you're looking for mercury. So some individuals, they have old cavities that have had mercury fillings. And it's important that we evaluate that to see if it's an organic or an inorganic exposure. So organic's going to be like your fish or other types of environmental factors. Your inorganic's going to be things like from amalgams or your cavities. Because if you have amalgams and they're leaching these mercury, it's going to be constant exposure. And we have to know which one is the issue so we can address it appropriately by getting it removed appropriately, which we'll talk about that today. And then the last one we can look at is obviously the environmental stuff. Environmental testing. Sorry, I'm writing so small and so low. Environmental testing as well, which can be done through different avenues of testing as well, if you have to go that far. But typically, these are the ones we're mostly focusing on, and the environmental we typically handle through these similar detoxification processes. Because if there's environmental things that have to be done, this person maybe been exposed to glyphosate or other types of pollutions. As we start to remove these things, it's going to go out on its own as well as we start to really move into the detoxification process. So this is how we test for these types of things. Now, once we understand what it is, what do we have to do? Well, again, we have to understand what we're dealing with. Are we dealing with genetics? Are we dealing with detoxification function? What's really going on? Or are we dealing with them both? Because if we're dealing with them both, we really have to really focus on helping this individual get better.